At a meeting in the Brussels Press Club, the Swiss ambassador to the European Union, Roberto Balzaretti, spoke on the free movement of persons in Europe, asking whether Switzerland and the United Kingdom face similar issues. We asked the ambassador about the similarities and differences with the UK's renegotiations and forthcoming referendum. Roberto Balzaretti, ambassador of Switzerland to the EU. The UK is about to vote in a referendum on whether or not to remain within the EU. One of the big issues in that debate is migration. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the situation in Switzerland on migration, particularly EU migration.
Well, we have a new situation after the 9th of February 2014. The Swiss have passed an amendment to the constitution requiring the government to introduce a national system of migration. And since we have, 80% of people migrating into Switzerland being citizens of the European Union, well, this concerns pretty much European citizens. So the problem is that this constitutional amendment is not in compliance with the bilateral agreement we have with the European Union. And so we need to find a way to bridge the gap between two very different points, two very different issues. The one being the constitutional requirement to introduce a system of quotas, and the other being the free movement of persons we have approved while signing in '99 the bilateral agreement. That's the issue we have today.
And what has been the negative impact on Switzerland of failing to meet this requirement of the EU?
Well, first of all, we are still meeting the requirement. The Constitution gives 3 years' time to implement national legislation, and we haven't implemented it yet. So the agreement is in place and is in force. But one of the consequences was that the EU refused to conclude new agreements. Another consequence was that we were not be allowed to participate in the programs of the European Union, research, education, culture. And generally speaking, of course, this creates a situation whereby it is difficult, just to continue as if nothing were with the European Union. So we are striving to a consensual solution of this issue in the next months, and I hope we will have it. The third consequence, and you mentioned it, is precisely the British referendum, because the European Union is telling us that before the British referendum, ahead of that, it will not be possible for the European Union to have any deal with Switzerland.
On the wider migration issues, you are part of Schengen, and could you say a little bit about how what is your relationship with Schengen? And also, we haven't heard a great deal about Switzerland in this refugee crisis. Can you tell us something about how the Swiss are dealing with migrants from countries like Syria and Iraq, Afghanistan?
Well, perhaps to start with that, we had less Syrians than other European countries. We had mainly people coming from Eritrea, Afghanistan, Somalia, but we have 50,000 last year. We have a population of 8 million persons. 50,000 is the same as having 500,000 in a population of 80 million. So we were pretty much touched by this issue. That's the first point. The second is that we are a Schengen-Dublin associated member, so we are sitting at the same table with other Schengen-Dublin members, and we contributed, I think, we tried to contribute to a solution to this issue. We decided to participate in all programs of the European Union, resettlement, relocation program, even if we are not obliged to do so, because it is mainly an EU issue, because we are convinced that the only way of finding a lasting solution is for all to cooperate. And you perhaps don't hear as much as others, talk about that concerning Switzerland. Well, mainly I think for two reasons. The first being that when you look at statistics and discussion, the European Union member states are quite centered on themselves. They don't think of other countries around like Norway or Switzerland. And the second is perhaps, I'm sorry, I will be a little bit arrogant, is that we deal with this issue without any problem. So people arrive, they are hosted, they are cared for, they get what they need. They have a good asylum procedure, and so there is not that a big discussion about that.
Big concern in the UK is our trade arrangements with the EU. They're still very important, and those who want to remain in the EU argue that we must be sitting around the table agreeing on the decisions that affect the single market. Do you feel, what is your trade relationship with the EU, and do you feel excluded from those decisions, and is that damaging to you as a country?
Well, we choose, after the Swiss rejected a multilateral agreement, it was the European Economic Area Agreement in '92, we choose to conclude sectoral agreements with the European Union. And the European Union agreed because, we are an important economic partner of the Union. So today our relations are based on this sectoral agreement. You have transportation, public procurements, and so on. They are important, of course. They are very important even in certain branches, and we would have problems, not having those agreements. But the situation is different if you take a multilateral framework like the EEA, where Norway and Iceland and Liechtenstein are, and it's even different if you have full membership. Now, we know that these agreements are not the same as being a full member. We knew it from the beginning, and so we arranged, procedures and systems so that we can live with that. For a member state to abandon the co-decision and having something else, well, that's another issue, and that's a decision that the British people must take for themselves.
People in the UK say they want their sovereignty back. You have sovereignty, you would argue, but in having to adopt this legislation, have you actually really got sovereignty over the laws in your country?
Well, de jure, so legally, of course, because we are not supposed to do anything we don't like to. But if in a given bilateral agreement, well, the system works only if you change your legislation in order to keep track of the legislation changements within the European Union, or you don't have an agreement anymore. So the sovereignty is a formal one, is not probably a complete real one. And once you are in, well, of course, you concede a part of your sovereignty to a supranational entity, but if you have co-decision, then you are exercising your sovereignty there. It's a very difficult discussion. The main point is that we have a well-working system we should preserve and develop, and that's my concern.
One last question. Another issue of great importance to the UK is financial services, likewise a very big sector for the Swiss economy. Are you concerned about how the Capital Markets Union will be developing over the next few years?
Well, our concern is not to have an equal access to a large European market than all other competitors we have around Europe. That's the concern. If the Capital Market Union, is implemented properly and it's a kind of level playing field for all of us, then, well, we will have to live with this new situation. What's important to Switzerland is to have access to the market, well, like others have access to the Swiss market. And there the discussion is open. Whether we can have, ad hoc access depending on the different issues you have in the market, or if we can one day conclude a bilateral agreement on financial services. The discussion is not done yet, so we will have wait and see.